Hello, this is Mr. Berry, and today's video is going to be talking about painting. Specifically, we're going to talk about watercolor painting and the supplies that are needed to use watercolors, as well as the activity we're going to be doing to kind of get you warmed up to using watercolors. We're going to be creating some different textures. So this is a painting that I did with watercolors, and you can see that it has some different textures in it. But I wanted to point out just a couple of things. First of all, I want to point out that there are some smooth areas here, and then there's also some areas that are textured in the trees for the leaves, and then down here where the bushes were. All right. So the first thing I want to show you is I want to show you the different brushes that we use. This is called a round brush. It's a large round brush. And round brushes come in lots of different sizes, as well as his other brush. This is called a flat brush. This is the brush that I use the most on this specific painting. But on the building over here, I use the flat brush, because the flat brush is good for doing nice washes on buildings or whatever you're painting. It's a nice flat area. It's called a flat brush because you can see, if you look at it, it has a nice line to it. So that's why they call it a flat brush. Again, both of these come in lots of different sizes. So I'll put those away now. Now let me put this away, and you can look at what we're going to be painting on. This is watercolor paper. And watercolor paper comes in 3 different types. It comes in a rough, it comes in a cold press, and it comes in a hot press. This is cold press. Now I want you to think of an ice cream cone when you're thinking of those different types. Cold press is kind of bumpy. So when you think of an ice cream cone being fresh out of the freezer, it's nice and bumpy. But then when it starts melting and it gets hot, it gets smooth. So a hot press is going to be smoother. And then you have the rough, which is very, very bumpy. I like using the cold press just because I like to have a little bit of a texture to the paper. Now, in your specific situation, if you don't have access to watercolor paper, you can just use a paper that is thick. It just needs to be thick enough so that when you put the water on top of it or put the paint on top of it, it doesn't start buckling and bubbling. Even with this paper, I go ahead and tape it down so that helps it. We call it stretching. So on your paper, no matter what kind of paper it is, it's good to have some tape that you can tape around the outside and get that ready. All right, so for the paint, we've got our palette here, and our palette has all the different colors of paint on it. And this is one of the palettes that I use, and this is the type of paint that I use. However, for today, we're going to be using a different kind of paint, a different type of palette. We're just going to be using this Prang watercolor palette like this, just because it's a lot easier for students to use this sometimes, because the paints are already mixed up. You don't have to worry about that part. Maybe when you take a watercolor class sometime, you'll learn how to use the tube paints and how to put those all together. All right, so there's a couple of things I want to show you. I would like to show you this palette. This is a palette that I use when I paint outside sometimes. It's made by Winsor Newton. And if you'll notice, it also has the little cakes of paint in here. And notice the little tiny paintbrush. This is a container of water here that you can fill up. So this is if I was going to paint outside and I was just doing a smaller painting, similar to what you saw earlier. It's very nice. This is another type of palette. Okay, now this palette is another palette that I take outside, and I'll open it up so you can see it. It has, also you can tell it has the tube paint squeezed into here, and I also took in pencil and I wrote the type of paint that it was, the color it was, so I'd remember. And this has a little hole in it like this. So when I put my thumb in it like this, I can hold that onto my arm, and I can paint with this as I'm standing up outside. So this is kind of a traditional, what we call plein air palette. Plein air just means that it's painted outside. All right, I've got one more thing I want to show you, and then we're going to go and get started on our painting for today. This is a water brush, and water brushes They have a handle that is hollow, and you can see the water moving around inside there. But you squeeze it, and when you squeeze that handle, the water starts going up into where the brush is, and you can just use this to brush onto your painting, whatever you're using. So those are some of the supplies that you might use. Of course, you'll need a container of water, and also you'll need some paper towels, and we will be using those today when we get started to do our painting. So here's a finished piece that I worked on showing some different textures, and we're going to have a total of about 5 different textures I'm going to demonstrate for you here in just a minute. Of course, you're going to start out with your piece of watercolor paper and having it taped down. And you can see I've got my watercolor set over here handy. And you're going to start by taking your pencil and you're going to be drawing just a really simple landscape. And make sure that you've got space, plenty of space in between each line. So these are just basically hills, and you can have them going either direction and shaped however you want them to be. So drawing them in pencil first, that's 1, 2, 3, and then 4 and 5. Once you finish with that, you're going to take a permanent marker. It's important that it is a permanent marker. I like to use Sharpies, and you're going to outline right on top of your pencil line. The reason why it's important to use a permanent marker and not a water-based marker is because we're putting this down before a watercolor, and if we use a water-based, what's going to happen is it's just going to bleed all over the place, and it's going to mess up your painting. So there we go. So we are ready to get started. I'm going to move it up towards the top here so you can see what's going on, and I'm going to start by taking my round brush. And my round brush is going to get dipped with water. And I'm going to wet down this top section where my sky is going to be. And then I'm going to come over here and get some blue. I'll put a little bit of it into my mixing tray so I can kind of lighten it down a little bit. Alright, then I'm just going to start painting it like this. A little darken area in some sections. Go across. Take my paper towel now, and I'm going to wad up the end of it. And when I say lifting, you're basically going to be lifting up by pressing into the paint and softening those edges and making that look more like a cloud. You see that now. So I'm kind of looking at what the paint did and going with what the paint left. It's actually in watercolor, paint does a lot of the work. This right here, that will be a little bit of a fluffy cloud there as well. And there we go. So that's a really nice cloudy sky. I'm going to rinse out my brush and wipe it down on my paper towel to get it ready for the next one. The next one I'm going to be using purple. I'm going to get some purple. And this one I'm not going to wet down the paper first, but I'm going to get plenty of paint on my paper. Now if you'll notice when I'm painting, I'm holding my brush sideways. I'm leaving a little bit of white between the marker and the paint. And that's because that blue paint up there on the top is wet. And if I paint right up to that black line, there's going to be places where this purple is going to get into that blue. I can always come back in later after this dries and I can soften that so it's not quite so harsh. A little bit more water to it. Right, so I've got a nice wash covering that whole area. Now comes the fun part. going to take some of the salt that I've got over here. This is Epsom salt. And I'm going to immediately drop it down inside the paint. Like that. I don't want it to be in the other area because then it'll end up getting a texture there. I'm going to leave it up there in the sky and see what happens. So that is my second texture. Now, as we're going along, you're going to notice what's going to start happening here. Is those are going to start exploding, and you're going to start seeing some white spots show up in that area. All right, for the next one, let's get some green. Basically doing about the same thing. We get a nice full paintbrush. Same thing, leave your whites right there next to the line. Bring this down. This is a little bit dulled down because I had some of that purple in there. I didn't rinse out of my brush completely, and that's okay. It's not quite as bright. A little bit more water. You don't have to worry about this being completely smooth because now I'm going to take one of my other brushes and I'm going to use the handle. And I've got my alcohol right here and I'm going to dip it into there. And I'm just going to start putting it on my paint. That's what happens right after I put that on there. Now, the neat thing about this one is after it dries, I could always come in with another color using colored pencil or maybe another wash over the top of this with a different color. But this is a really nice, I was drawing frogs the other day. I think this would be perfect texture if I were going to paint a frog with all the warts all over the top of the frog. I think that's probably enough. Rinse off the top, okay? Wipe that off really good. Now we're ready for the next one. I'm going to take my brush, my large round brush. I'm going to use blue again this time, I think. And then get a paintbrush full of blue paint. Put a little bit at the top first. But then I have a white crayon. I'm going to take that white crayon, I'm going to do some lines in here. Making it kind of look like grass. I take my brush now and finish that up. I only need it to be a little watery, so show up there. Bringing this one down, you can see how that causes that to resist. You can use crayon because there's a little bit of wax in crayon. And this will show up better once it dries, probably. But you get the idea, you can see how it's resisting. And really starting to see that crayon show up. That's going to dry. When it dries a lot lighter. Watercolors dry lighter when they are after they've sat for a while. Okay, rinsing my brush out. Before I do anything else, I am going to take my pen, and before I paint, I'm going to do some scratching on here. I'm going to do some scratching beforehand, so you can see what that looks like, and some scratching afterwards. I'm even going to go up in here to my blue, because this is the foreground. I want to have lots of nice textures in through here. All right, so taking this time, I'm going to take the brown. And I'm going to paint right on top of that, and you can see right away how that pigment from the paint is sticking into those sections where it's scratched, and it creates a line. So it's like those areas had been painted. I use this a lot if I'm doing a landscape and I'm going to have like grasses in the front, or sometimes these could be trees in the background. Okay, so there's that. I'm going to come in now with a little bit of black. If we paint on the top of that, you see how that works here. Like this, just paint in through here. Creates kind of a wet on wet fuzzy look, which is what we're looking for. And then I'm going to take that pen again, and we're going to go back into it after it has been painted. You can see, actually I'm kind of painting with the paint that's there. Now, I'm using a pen that would be used on a bulletin board, but you could use like a stick pin or safety pin. And I even have people use like the end of their paintbrush, like this. My flat brush here has that would work too. So if you want to use the end of your paintbrush. So there we have 5 different textures going from our background here with the sky, where we did the where we took the paint and lifted it off of the paper. And then we used salt. Now look what's happening with that salt. And then the alcohol. And then here we created some textures with just a white crayon doing a resist. And down here is my favorite with the scratching. Let me show you the other one that I did kind of as a practice. Here you can see what happens with that salt after it's completely dry. There's all those crystallines. You know, that kind of looks like ice on a window of some kind. So, okay. So this is what you can do to show different textures and to practice different textures. And next time in our video, we are going to be talking about mixing colors and how to use your watercolors to blend and mix colors, and the different techniques you can do there. All right, so we'll see you then.